In this video, we're gonna go through how you get cinematic footage with the DJI Mini 3 Pro, and a lot of these tips will work with other drones as well. Now, instead of just showing you a bunch of pretty shots and just telling you some different techniques, I wanna show you step by step how I approach a scene and what I do before I press record and start capturing footage. So in this video, we're gonna go through all the camera settings and also some ideas around what I would do with my drone to get the best looking footage out of any scene. But before we get into that, I just wanna tell you 3 reasons why you would want cinematic footage out of your drone. Now, reason number 1 is simple. You just want better looking footage. And there is a standard for Hollywood movies, for commercials, for just high-end production. And those are the techniques that we're trying to aspire to when we're out filming with our drone. Now, the second reason is that if you're working with a client, well, you wanna make sure that you're getting the best looking footage for your client. And typically you wanna shoot with these standards that you see in Hollywood cinema or you see in commercial work. And when you do this, your footage is gonna look more professional. And then whenever you break from these standards, you're doing it with a purpose. And having a better understanding of this classic cinematic look is going to help you understand when you do need to change your settings away from this look, and you'll be doing it with intention. So if you need to change your shutter speed or your white balance for a specific reason, you're gonna know why versus just not understanding how your camera works and you're just kind of flying in the sky hoping that you get good footage. And reason number 3 is you wanna sell your footage as stock footage. Ideally, when you're uploading your shots to stock footage websites to try and earn some extra money, well, you wanna have the best looking footage possible. And there's a better chance that your footage will sell if it does have this pro cinematic look. All right, so now let's set up our camera to get more of this cinematic look. We're gonna change a bunch of different settings and we're also gonna add some overlays on the camera so we can see what's happening with your exposure and how you're framing a subject. So step 1, let's turn on some of the exposure settings. We're gonna go in the upper right-hand corner and we're gonna go into the camera section and we're gonna scroll down. We wanna turn on our histogram and we wanna turn on our overexposure warning. Now on the screen, you can see right here in the middle, this is your histogram. I'm moving it around right now. The histogram tells you all your light values from darkest to lightest. So right now I have the camera fully on auto. Everything is auto. So this graph is gonna be somewhere in the middle because the camera is gonna be finding what it thinks looks best for the scene that you're flying in. Now we're gonna take control of our settings in a little bit. So this is gonna be important to see how much our exposure values are shifted brighter and darker. Now the next thing that we turned on was the overexposure warning. And you can see right here, this little cloud section on the right side of the screen, the top of those clouds are overexposing. Now, if I turn my exposure value up super bright, let's go to +3, you can see zebras across the entire screen. Now those zebras are basically telling you where your exposure is cut off and it's just white. So these are both good tools to use when you're out flying so that you could see if your footage is too bright. Ideally, when you're shooting this style of footage, you wanna make sure that you're not having super overexposed sections of your footage because that's gonna look amateurish. You wanna make sure that you're getting the proper exposure every shot. So that means having your exposure values somewhere in the middle, and the only things that are overexposing are super bright things in your shot. So in this setting, you have these clouds way out in the distance. Well, they might overexpose slightly depending on how you're shooting the rest of the scene, but otherwise you don't wanna have anything overexposed. So let's take this back down to 0 for my exposure value. And for auto, this looks pretty good just for a standard shot. So step 2 is gonna be taking control of our white balance. So your white balance determines what colors are in the scene. So we're outside, it's middle of the day, so we're gonna wanna shoot at daylight white balance. We don't want the color to shift at all when we're flying. We wanna have the same color throughout the entire shot. So there's 2 ways that we can do this. We could either turn on the Pro mode, which is in the lower right-hand corner, or we could go to the 3 dots in the upper right-hand corner. Let's go to the 3 dots first, just to show you that spot. So up here, you'll go to camera again, and you'll scroll down to white balance and you'll see it says auto. So turn it on to manual, and daylight is around 5600 Kelvin. So we're gonna slide this up to around 5600. All right, so now we're locked in for the white balance for this scene. Now, if I bring this down, you can see what happens. I put it to 2000 Kelvin, everything is blue. So this is shooting at the wrong color temperature, and you can see how much it affects the footage. Now let's go push it the other direction all the way up to 10,000. Now you can see it's super warm. So you wanna make sure that you have your white balance dialed in properly for the scene that you're flying in. A lot of times you're gonna be shooting outdoors in bright sunlight. well, you'll be shooting at 5600. But if you're shooting closer to sunset or sunrise, you're gonna shift this around a little bit. And so you just wanna make sure that you dial in your settings best for the scene that you're flying in. And then if you have clouds in the sky and there's no sun, well, you're also gonna shift your Kelvin slightly so that the white parts of your image are actually white. All right, so step 3 is we're gonna take control of our exposure and go full manual. So in the lower right-hand corner, you'll click the little auto button and it will turn into pro mode. Now you could take control of all of your settings. If you click right next to Pro Mode, this screen will pop up with your ISO, shutter, and your metering mode. And then right next to that, you'll have this other button, which will show a bunch of other settings. You can have your white balance, your resolution, frame rates. You could change your color, your coding format, everything. So some of the settings that we've already adjusted in the main menu can also be adjusted here. I wanted to show you the main menu first, just to show you that there's a couple places where you can adjust these settings. So step 3, we're turning it on full manual. And the next thing that we're gonna do is lock in our ISO. So we wanna shoot at the lowest ISO possible, because as you bump up your ISO to something like 6400, you're gonna get a lot of grain in your footage, and you don't want that noise or that grain. And we're trying to get professional looking footage. So you want the least amount of noise as possible, so you'll just turn this down to 100 ISO. If you're shooting at night or you're closer to sunset, sunrise, you're gonna boost this a little bit depending on your settings, but you just don't wanna push it too far into 6400 unless you're in a setting where it's city at night. That might be where you'll actually use that setting, but you wanna try to avoid it as much as possible. So the next thing that we're gonna change is our resolution and our frame rate. So let's go over to the little sliders to the left and let's scroll to resolution and frame per second. So ideally when you're shooting with your drone, you wanna shoot at the highest resolution possible. So in the DJI Mini 3 Pro, we're gonna shoot in 4K. Now, you're gonna shoot in whatever your project settings are for real-time footage. So if you're shooting in 24 frames per second, well, you wanna select 24 frames per second when you're shooting real-time footage. And if you wanna shoot slow motion, well, then you'll bump up your frame rate. So I've heard a lot of people say that you should just shoot everything in 60, and then you can adjust your settings later, whether you want slow motion or you don't want slow motion. And the issue with that is you're not gonna be able to set your shutter speed to where you need to get the cinematic look. Shooting 60 is great, but as soon as you put 60 into like a 24 or 30p timeline with the shutter speed set where you need to for a 60 frames per second shot, well, your footage is gonna be a little bit more jittery. And I'll explain this in a little bit when we get to shutter speed. So what you wanna do when you're shooting real-time footage, you wanna put it in the frame rate that your project timeline is actually going to be in. So personally, I shoot a lot of my content in 30 frames per second, but I know there's a lot of you out there that like the look of 24. This is gonna be something that you're gonna have to decide. And the standard for Hollywood cinema is 24, but I think that online content, and especially here on YouTube, looks better in 30. I'll put a link down below in the description that goes through a video where I compare 24 and 30 and really talk about the differences and why you might use one versus the other. But for the purposes of this video, I'm gonna shoot in 30 frames per second because that's what I typically use. Now in 24, 25, and 30 frames per second, you get this HQ mode. This means that you're getting a little bit of an HDR effect with the footage. So your shadows are gonna be a little bit lifted and your highlights might be a little bit more muted, so you get more dynamic range in your shot. Now, if we wanna get slow motion footage, I would bump this up to 60 frames per second, and that way I could slow it down 2 times for 30 frames per second timeline. Let's just put it in 30 for now, and then we'll go back to 60 later. Now, the next setting that you're gonna wanna change is your color. So right now I'm shooting in the normal profile. It's punchy, it's got a lot of contrast, and it just looks good out of camera. But if you want to get the most out of your camera, you're going to want to color grade. So we're going to go back into our pro settings by clicking on the menu, and we're going to want to go de-cine-like. This is going to flatten out your image so that you can color grade it later in your editing software. Now, if you want to learn more about how to color grade your footage, well, after this video, I'll put a link down below in the description to an entire course that I've put together for creative color grading, which will definitely help grade your footage. So now that we're locked into our frame rate, our resolution, our color, our white balance, the last thing that we need to shift is our shutter speed. So ideally, when you're doing shutter speed, you wanna have proper motion blur. And motion blur is the blurring that happens between frames. If you freeze this right here, you'll see my hand is frozen. It's because I'm shooting at proper motion blur to get the cinematic look for my A camera here. And to get proper motion blur, you wanna shoot a shutter speed, which is double your frame rate. So for my 30 frames per second clip that I'm shooting, I wanna shoot at a 1/60th shutter speed. So I'm gonna go to my settings and I'm gonna drop my shutter speed all the way down to 1/60th. And great, now we're ready to take off. But why is this shot just overexposed? Well, we're gonna have to make some adjustments to the actual lens itself, and put on an ND filter to be able to compensate for the fact that we're bringing down our shutter speed all the way down to 1/60th, which lets a ton of light into the camera. But at 1/60th, you're getting motion blur. So every frame when you're moving the camera is gonna blur a little bit. If you're shooting at a higher shutter speed, well, every frame is gonna be frozen in time and it's gonna have this stutter. So if you want the more professional look that has this commercial quality, well, you'll notice that there's blurring happening between all the frames with movement of the camera or movement of the subject in the shot. So you wanna make sure that you're getting proper shutter speed for the frame rate that you've chosen. So for a 30 frames per second clip, we wanna shoot at 1/60th. Now, like I said a little bit ago, we're gonna add an ND filter, which is basically sunglasses for your camera to be able to compensate for the fact that this image is super bright. So on my A camera here, I'll take this off for you. You could see that this is shooting at 30 frames per second with a 160 and an ISO 100. Here is my ND filter. Put it on the camera and there you go. You can see that it's sunglasses for the camera. And this is what we're gonna do with our drone. So I've got this set of ND filters, and what we need to do is select the perfect one for the scene that we're in. So to do this, we want to set up all of our settings, which we've already done. And now what we'll do is take these ND filters and just put them in front of the lens until we find the one that gives us the proper exposure for this scene. So the ND filter that I landed on was ND64, and you can see on the image here, there's nothing overexposed with my overexposure warning, and if you look at the histogram, it's all squished in the middle and a little bit on the brighter side, but it's still in the middle. Nothing's too far on the right, too far on the left. And so you have to go through this process with every scene that you're shooting to find the ND filter that's gonna fit your settings that you have set. So you wanna make sure that you set all of your settings before you put on the ND filter. Now, the last thing we didn't talk about was aperture, and the Mini 3 Pro has a fixed aperture of 1.7. So if you're flying with something like the Mavic 3, well, you actually have an aperture that you can change. So you could dial in your settings a little bit differently by upping your aperture and then using less ND on the front of the lens. And in lower light situations, you won't even need to use the ND filter to get the proper look. So the last thing that we need to change before we could start flying and getting our shots is in the menu settings. We'll go to the upper right-hand corner of the 3 dots, and we're gonna change the gimbal settings and the yaw settings. So if we go to control, we'll scroll down to advanced gimbal settings, and this screen will pop up. You have pitch speed, pitch smoothness, yaw rotation speed, and yaw smoothness. And you have this for normal mode, sport mode, and cine mode. So ideally, when you're flying, you're gonna use the mode that best fits the type of shot that you're filming. So if you're filming like a fast moving car, well, you'll probably have it in sport mode to keep up with that car. But if you're filming like a person or you just want like a landscape and you're close to the ground, well, then you'll probably use the cine mode. The settings that we're gonna change in here is how smooth that motion happens for each one of these, and then also how much it feathers in and feathers out. So let's just change the cine mode because that's gonna be your slowest mode. And so if you wanna get these creeping shots where it's very cinematic, well, you'll wanna change some of these settings. So you have your pitch speed, that's how much the gimbal moves when you go full rotation on the controller. And the pitch smoothness is how much it feathers in and feathers out. So first, let me just turn this down to 0 so I could show you the effects of it. I'm gonna turn this pitch speed up to 100 and pitch smoothness to 0. So now when I do the gimbal move, so it's just pulling it super fast. Whereas I'll do the opposite, so I'll take my pitch speed, put it down to like 10, and put my smoothness up to like 20. Now when I pull, you can see it kind of stop. It takes a second to feather in, move, and then feather out. That's still too fast for this kind of movement. My cine mode, I want it to be very gentle and I want to have that movement just slowly ramp up as it moves into the scene. So let's go back to our advanced settings. I'm gonna turn this down to 5. And I'm gonna do my pitch smoothness at 25. Now when I move it, you can see it slowly creeps and I let go and then it slowly fades out of it. I think that's pretty good for this kind of scene because now I can just adjust it slightly and then it'll give me a nice little ramp up and then feather out of it. Now you could do the same thing with the pivoting in the sky. So your yaw rotation, that's how much the drone twists on an axis. So you'll do the same thing. You'll find the settings that work best for you for your cine mode. Now you could also adjust your normal and your sport mode. It really comes down to finding the settings that look best for the types of scene that you're flying in. So It's gonna all change depending on what you're filming and what your specific look is going for, but ideally, you don't want jerky motion. So you wanna have smooth ins and outs of all your shots, and you wanna make sure that everything just feels fluid. In general, to get better cinematic looking footage, you want no jerky motion. So no throwing the drone around, but rather you just want drone movements that feather in and feather out and then move nice and slow, and there's no jerky motion that calls attention to the actual drone moving in the sky. Now, when it comes to what you're actually filming, there's a few rules that are gonna help you get better looking shots. Now, the first is you wanna get a variety of shots. So you don't wanna just shoot the same angle over and over. You don't wanna just go way up in the sky and just get the same big, wide perspective every time. Try to vary up your shots. Low, high, medium, close, far. Play around with them. And then with that, you're gonna be changing your perspective and changing your angles. And then finally, you wanna play with how fast or how slow you're moving the drone. Now, I did a super detailed video that goes through 100+ drone movements, and these are what you're gonna use to get cinematic looking footage. And so I'm gonna link that video down below in the description so that you can see some different drone movements that you can use to get some better looking shots in your videos. And the last thing I would suggest is flying closer to sunset or sunrise. I know I'm out here in high noon, the sun's right above me, but I have 2 young kids and I help out with my wife in the morning and at night, so I miss most sunrise and sunsets right now. But when I'm out traveling and I'm working on a project, I'm always trying to get footage right at sunrise or sunset because you're gonna have more color in the sky, you're gonna have better lighting, your shadows will be longer, there will be more of a roll off in all of your highlights. Like, it just looks better overall. And a lot of times when you see cinematic looking footage, a lot of it is just shot time of day. That's a big part of it, is just shooting at the proper time of day to get the best looking shots. And so you can see from some of this footage that I'm showing you right here, this was up in Alaska a few weeks ago. I was shooting at sunrise and sunset, and I just got some amazing shots in the middle of nowhere in Alaska. And if I was to shoot this at high noon, it just wouldn't look that good. And shooting it just before the sun goes down or right after the sun goes down, well, you're gonna get the best looking footage. And one thing that you should try to do is always get the best looking shots closer to sunrise or closer to sunset, and plan your shoot around that. You can get a lot of good shots during the day, that's no problem, and especially if there's like clouds in the sky. But if you have the opportunity to get some of those beautiful sunset looking shots, well, that's gonna help make your edit just look so much better. All right, so here is a short little sequence from this area that I'm at with the proper settings to get cinematic looking footage, and with a few different angles and a few different perspectives, filming me just walking around, because that's what I'm doing. Now next, make sure you check out this video right here, which goes through 100+ drone moves that you can use when you're making your cinematic videos. I'll see you over there.